Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Adam Sos here for Rebel News, and Rebel is once again taking on the government in a David versus Goliath battle. And one of the main fighters in this battle is Sarah Miller of JSS Barristers. If you could maybe tell people who aren't familiar with the COVID situations a little bit about what's going on in Canada.
Yeah, so in February, about the end of February, the federal government implemented what is they're calling a government authorized accommodation requirement. So when you fly from an international airport into one of the 4 that remain open in Canada, the federal government has said, oh, you've been internationally, you're flying into the country, you must quarantine for 3 days in a government authorized accommodation. Other people have referred to these as gulags, as detention facilities, what have you. They're all government mandated hotels run by the hoteliers, and you're mandated there for up to 3 days. You have to pay in advance for these hotels. They're quite expensive. You get really low grade food. There's reports of people not getting food at all, not actually getting their outdoor breaks, those types of things. And you're restricted. You're under security watch. You can't leave your room. You can't go outside unless you're monitored. So it's very much a detention of incoming travelers who land and then have to be detained for up to 3 days.
And so you've been in court, speaking of 3 days, for 3 days fighting this. Can you give us an update about how things have been going legally speaking?
Yeah, so when this first came out, Rebel made the decision that this could not stand. Mr. Bexty, Kian Bexty, had actually flown to Florida to report for Rebel News, had flown back into the country and was put into quarantine lockdown. So when we heard about that and Rebel came to us, we made out a plan, a litigation plan. And so us, as well as the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and another independent lawyer, we've all launched our independent actions against this. And so we've made an application to federal court to say, our application says the federal court government authorized accommodation is contrary to Section 7. It's detention that impairs your civil liberty and is not within the principles of fundamental justice. It's also contrary to Section 9. It's an arbitrary detention. And we've also argued that it's not within the legislative authority of the governor and council. So we started our oral submissions on Tuesday. That was the first day. Concluded on Tuesday. We heard from another applicant and the respondent. The respondent, I think, the respondent is the government. They had over 7 hours of oral submissions on why they think it's appropriate to lock up Canadians for 3 days. And yeah, I think it went really well. Mr. Hawks of my office was the lead counsel on it, and it went, I think, really well. The government is arguing that it's not a detention. They haven't, in my estimation, relied on very good evidence for that. It's clearly a detention from our estimation, and we think, hopefully, that the federal government will come to the same conclusion.
Wonderful. And I know that the government accepted, apparently, lots of the documents filed and said that a very strong case was filed. Is that true?
So there was thousands of pages of evidence before the court on this. And I just want to reverse my very last comment before you started talking. I said, hopefully the federal government comes to the same conclusion. What I meant was federal court comes to the same conclusion. But yeah, there was thousands of documents filed, lots of evidence cuts both ways, of course, in cases like this and many others. Some of their evidence showed that they had argued from their affiant that they put forward that if you know you have COVID, you would quarantine differently. You would be more inclined to follow the rules. What we found in their evidence that they actually filed, the hard copy records, is that incidents of contact and spread were actually about the same, whether you found out on day 1 or day 7. You're contacting the same amount, you're complying with quarantine in the same degree. So yeah, there was a lot of evidence. A lot of it had to do with testing, which we didn't impugn. I mean, we kind of said, test as much as you want, but don't put people in detention. Like that's really the argument that we made out, is you can't put people arbitrarily in these detention facilities. It's not appropriate.
And perhaps this isn't so much a legal question, but a pragmatic one. We're hearing that if individuals are exhibiting symptoms upon arrival at the airport, they're not even being put into quarantine hotels, they're then being sent home. You would think that might be the one instance they could potentially argue it's justifiable. But is it true that if someone's exhibiting symptoms, they aren't sent there, they're sent home?
So the government's evidence on this is that yes, some people who come land in Canada, they have COVID symptoms, are sent directly home. It's not every single person who is sick is being sent home, but that was exactly our argument: is if you land and you're sick, presumably maybe you have COVID. Okay, well then you're being sent home to quarantine or isolate at home. Or you might be sent to a DQF. So it's not everybody. Like I don't want to misstate it. It's not everybody who's sick is just sent home. But the point being is that the government has said, well, if you have a suitable isolation plan, you are permitted to go home and isolate safely. And what we've said is, how does it make sense then for every healthy person who lands to be sent to a GAA, like government authorized accommodation? That's arbitrary, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So I think we can certainly agree that healthy individuals upon entry to Canada being stuck inside what some have colloquially called COVID jails is not right. If you disagree with the government locking Canadians up upon their arrival home, go to nocovidjails.com. You can help this legal battle against the government, this David versus Goliath fight. Sarah Miller, I want to thank you again for the update, always willing to meet us and share updates from court battles. And thank you for all your hard work. Thanks everyone for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sose.
If you'd like to help us fight Justin Trudeau's unconstitutional COVID jail system in court, please donate today at nocovidjails.com.